There is a word in my language that doesn't translate cleanly into Galactic Common. Vorath. The closest approximation is something between harmless until it wasn't and the last ordinary moment before everything changed. A spark before a fire qualifies. The sealed door before someone opens it who shouldn't. The stone at the top of a slope that has been sitting there for 1,000 years until the one morning it doesn't. I have been filing reports about Sergeant Marin Cole for 17 years. She is the most Vorath thing I have ever catalogued. It started because of a cub. A Croth juvenile alone, injured, grieving, trapped inside a dying research station in a system that 17 Conclave warships were racing to reach at emergency velocity. One human woman had already reached it. Without authorization. Without backup. Without any equipment I would personally classify as adequate for entering a structure where the previous research team had died at the cellular level. She had a folding multi-tool for coalition field ration packs, and whatever particular defect of human psychology makes certain of them constitutionally incapable of leaving a thing alone when leaving it alone would have been the correct, survivable, professionally responsible choice. I was watching on surveillance cameras from an observation shell I was not authorized to be in. I should have filed a report and left. I did not file a report and leave. What follows is the log of what I watched happen instead, and why the Sovereignty Coalition now maintains a classified designation called Vorath Pair that their junior analysts are not permitted to access without 3 layers of command authorization, a psychological screening, and a direct sign-off from someone who has personally read the Yorthkiel incident file. I should be more surprised that I'm in it. I'm not. Log record, Ocean 7, Intelligence Analyst, Vethari Conclave, 3rd tier, for now. Station, Yorthkiel Research Installation, Orinth System. Mission status, officially closed. Personal status, complicated. The station cameras were still functional. That was the first thing I logged, Yorthkiel's external systems intact, internal visual feed active, which meant whoever was inside had disabled the docking sensors and nothing else. Either stupidity or a deliberate choice to remain visible. I'd been watching the feed for 40 minutes working through my second-to-last mineral paste cube and I still hadn't decided which. Note for the log, 0412 station time. Ocean 7 reporting from unauthorized surveillance shell, outer orbit, Yorthkiel Research Station. Human life sign confirmed, sublevel 3, interior. Subject has bypassed outer airlock without authorization, backup, or any equipment I would professionally classify as sufficient for entering a structure where the previous research team died at the cellular level. I paused dictation. Watched. She moved like someone who had been in collapsed buildings before. Not cautiously, there was no hesitation at thresholds, no pausing to check a corner before she committed to it, but, specifically. Weight on the balls of her feet. One hand free. The other carrying a light source she had modified from a component pulled from the docking corridor's utility panel, rewired into something that worked, origin unidentifiable. She had made it work somewhere between the airlock and the first camera. I noted this without annotation because I didn't have an annotation category that covered it. Sergeant Marin Cole. Human. Terran Coalition, 3rd Forward Company. 31 standard years. Commendations I was partly cleared to read and one disciplinary notation so thoroughly redacted that the redaction itself had been partially redacted. Which is, in my professional experience, its own kind of commendation. She was here because the dead lead researcher's suit beacon had been transmitting on a frequency that overlapped with Coalition personnel recovery signals. Standard distress band. She would have picked it up 3 sectors out, running passive. Would have filed for authorization. Should have waited. The Croth juvenile had been alone in Yorthkiel for 12 days. I should explain the Croth. Briefly. For the log. The Croth are not feared because of their biology, though their biology rewards fear. They are feared because they orient. Every Croth, from emergence, maps the world through relationship. Who belongs near them? Who doesn't? Who has entered their space, touched their objects, approached their claimed. An adult Croth can maintain a relational map of thousands of individuals with a specificity that 3 of our oldest conclave member species have described, in separate closed-door sessions, as deeply personal in ways we are not equipped to handle. The station groaned. Something structural, deep in the sublevels, not a collapse, just the slow contemplation of one. 3 years of field postings had taught me that sound, though not how to be comfortable with it. The research team here had been studying imprinting. Whether Croth Young, before the relational map fully calcifies, could form stable attachments to non-Croth caretakers. The lead researcher was a Peleth named Vasirin. 6 years of documented contact with the juvenile, from emergence through what the files called the calibration phase. He'd named the cub in his private logs. The official designation was specimen KJ7. His logs used a different word that I'm not cleared to repeat and that, for reasons I couldn't have explained at the time, I didn't want to. Vasirin was dead. Most of the team was dead. An adult Croth had arrived 12 days ago, not the cub's parent. The genetic markers showed no relation, and it had not come for the cub at all. It had come for something else and left without the cub and without resolution, which was the detail that had 17 conclave warships currently burning hard toward this system on orders I had read in full. The cub was 7 months post-emergence. 40 kilograms. Its right dorsal shoulder plate was missing a section, a ragged tear, something in the chaos of the adult's visit, and the exposed area underneath was dark-looking and wrong in the way that biological wrongness tends to announce itself. I had accessed Vasirin's backup archive from my surveillance shell. His last coherent log entry was audio, not typed. He'd been moving when he recorded it. In the hours after the adult Croth had left, he reported, the juvenile was carrying objects from his workspace and rearranging them in the cub's nesting area. His observation gloves. His stylus. A data chip he had given the cub once during a medical check as a distraction. Vest behavior, he called it. Grief response in a creature that had decided, in the particular way that Croth decide things, that Vasirin was its. I read the entry 3 times. Then, I read the third-to-last entry, which I had initially skimmed, and I stopped. In the weeks before the adult arrived, Vasirin had noted a behavioral shift he was attempting to classify. The cub wasn't exploring the station anymore. It was moving through the corridors in specific patterns. Positioning itself at junctions. Watching the team's movement habits. Vasirin thought it was the early stages of the relational map calcifying, the cub beginning to claim its territory by understanding it. He thought this was developmental progress. I was looking at camera footage of debris arrangements in the corridors that were not random. The cub wasn't waiting to be found. It was running the station. Note for the log, subject has reached sublevel 2. She has not triggered any of the pressure sensor tripwires, and I am recording, for the formal record, that the debris configurations in the east corridor appear to function as tripwires and that I have no professional alternative explanation, which means she either sees them or is in possession of luck I am not prepared to classify as luck. She stopped at the east corridor junction. Camera 7's angle was obstructed by a collapsed ventilation housing. I had most of the junction. Not all of it. Something in the East Passage had moved, not settling debris, not atmospheric pressure fluctuation, and Cole had stopped walking. She didn't raise the light. She lowered it. Aimed it at the floor, pointing the beam at her own feet. Then, she sat down. Directly onto the corridor floor. Both hands open on her knees. Back not touching the wall. She made herself into a smaller shape, a lower shape, and she stayed there. I had no tactical protocol for this. Correction, subject has seated herself on the floor of the East Corridor, sublevel 2. I am noting this for the record and moving forward. 4 minutes and 16 seconds. I counted because I needed something to do with my hands since my mineral paste cube had dissolved somewhere in the last 10 minutes without my noticing. I was now out of mineral paste. This registered as the smaller of my current crises. The shadow at the edge of camera 7's frame resolved. A forelimb first. The Croth juvenile's forelimbs occupy an anatomical category that Vasirin's team had spent considerable time arguing about in their notes because the structure doesn't commit to arm or leg and moves with its own grammar. Then, the second limb. Then, the shape of the cub, lowened, spread, the way Croth moved and the state Vasiran's files called inquiring. It stopped at the corridor's threshold. Cole looked at it. The cub looked at her. She reached into her left chest pocket, slowly, in the particular register of slow that means I know you are reading every motion I make, and withdrew a ration packet. Coalition field issue. Protein dense. She peeled it open without looking at it and set it on the floor directly in front of her, and moved her hands back to her knees. The cub tilted its head. Its injured shoulder shifted. 2 steps forward. Stop. 1 more. Stop. It ate the ration. Cole didn't react. No adjustment, no acknowledgement, not even a held breath I could read on the camera. She watched the cub with the same quality of attention she'd used navigating the tripwires, not fearless, I don't think it was fearlessness at all, but present. Completely, specifically present. The way you read something when you understand you will not get a second chance to understand it. Note for the log, the Croft juvenile consumed the ration and has now taken approximately 1 full body-length step towards Sergeant Cole and lain down on the corridor floor. It is looking at her. She has not moved. Updating this entry when one of them does. 11 minutes. They stayed like that for 11 minutes. I became aware partway through that I had been holding what passes for breath in a Vethari for a duration that my physiology is not built to sustain and that I had not noticed. Cole finally moved. She picked up the light. Stood. Looked down at the cub for exactly as long as she'd looked at the tripwires, reading it, deciding, and then she turned and walked east. Toward the nesting area. Toward sublevel 4. The cub stood up. It followed her. End of log entry, 0443 station time. For the record, 17 warships are now 3 hours and 28 minutes out. Their orders are to retrieve the Croth juvenile by any means classified as operationally appropriate, and to treat any unauthorized personnel present on site as a secondary containment issue. Sergeant Cole has been on site for 51 minutes. The cub has been alone for 12 days. I am beginning to think that secondary containment issue is going to encounter a definitional problem. The sovereignty ship didn't announce itself. Professional. I'll give them that. The Vethanora extraction vessel, unmarked, running an IFF transponder set to a commercial frequency that wasn't technically falsified and wasn't technically honest, came out a full 2 hours ahead of the schedule I calculated and settled into a parking orbit on the station's far side before I had finished my recalculations. I became aware of this when my passive sensors registered a docking approach on the secondary airlock, which was the moment I also became aware that I was completely out of mineral paste, that my surveillance shell's backup power was at 60%, and that nothing about the next several hours was going to be simple. Note for the log, 0501 station time. Sovereignty extraction vessel confirmed in system. 6-person team deploying via pressurized umbilical to Yorthkiel Station's secondary airlock. Loadout confirmed via passive sensor, Class 3 containment units, neural suppression, adjustable to Croft juvenile physiology. Standard tactical armor. Weapons I am going to classify for this log as the kind you bring when you have already decided the human who isn't supposed to be there is a complication and not a negotiation. They had a map. Vasiran's published station schematics, I assumed the only documentation available in the Open Conclave archive. 18 months old. It didn't reflect the structural deterioration since the adult Crotha's visit, didn't reflect the atmospheric inconsistencies in the sublevel corridors, and didn't reflect anything the cub had done to the station in 12 days of being alone and calibrating. The first man hit a tripwire at sublevel 3's North Junction. Nothing explosive. The cub had not been working with explosive materials, which I want on record as a thing that would later become a relevant distinction. What happened was, 62 kilograms of aluminum composite ceiling paneling dropped from a hinge point onto the corridor floor directly in front of him, and the impact resonance through the station's frame was significant, and the soldier immediately behind him discharged his weapon into the ceiling, and there was a brief and acoustically complex moment of team communication whose specific content my audio sensors couldn't fully decode but whose emotional register I felt qualified to characterize as regrouping. Note: Sovereignty team has lost the element of surprise. Logging this for record. Cole appeared on camera 4. She was on sublevel 3's west corridor, which should have put the Sovereignty team between her and the stairwell, which meant she had moved through the station's service crawlways in the time since I'd last tracked her on camera 2. 40-minute window. She had scouted the entire accessible crawlway network and mapped the Sovereignty team's entry point and made a calculation I was watching the result of, which did not leave time for me to feel anything specific about how she'd done it. She moved to the corridor junction and pressed something against the wall where the junction branched. Held it for 2 seconds. Released it. Moved back into the crawlway. I zoomed in. It was a compression valve from the station's atmospheric recycling infrastructure. When that valve turned, the corridor on sublevel 3 where the Sovereignty team was reorganizing would experience a pressure differential sharp enough to make every unanchored object in a 10-meter radius violently kinetic. The team's suits would compensate. This wasn't a decompression attack, it wasn't that kind of valve, but the compensating would take 4 seconds and the debris wouldn't wait. She also had 2 additional objects I couldn't identify yet. The Sovereignty team reorganized. Standard containment split, 3 soldiers moving toward the Cub's documented nesting area on sublevel 4, 3 holding the junction as a secondary. Professional formation. Vossiran's schematics would have been useful for this. Cole reached sublevel 4 via the crawlway. Camera 6 picked her up emerging at the lab's east maintenance port. I watched her stop. Listen. She turned the valve remotely. She had run a wire. I realized, watching it on camera 3, that she had run it before the Sovereignty team had finished their tripwire encounter, which meant she'd had the plan before she saw them split. 3 Sovereignty soldiers in a corridor of flying debris. Suits compensating. 40 seconds minimum of compromised visibility and disrupted formation. The 3 soldiers moving towards sublevel 4 had not been in the pressure zone. Note for the log: subject is demonstrating what Terran Coalition after-action reports classify as sequential environmental exploitation. I am noting, without annotation, that she identified, sourced, and positioned that valve in a station she had been inside for less than 2 hours, while simultaneously monitoring a Croth juvenile, while navigating tripwires, while apparently planning for a Sovereignty extraction team whose arrival she had no reason to have anticipated unless she had picked up the same passive sensor data I had, which means she had been running passive sensors on her approach, which means she'd been anticipating company before she ever docked. The Cub was not on any camera. That was new. The lab's ventilation housing above the secondary entrance was the size of a Vethari cargo crate. I looked at it on camera 6 and looked at the Cub's listed mass in Vossiran's files and looked back at the housing and noted this for the log without comment. Cole made a sound at the secondary entrance. Low. Patterned. 2 beats, a pause, a third. She did it twice. The station's microphones caught it in the 200 to 400 Hz range, nothing my acoustic library flagged as a known communication form. The ventilation housing above the door opened. The Cub dropped to the floor in front of her. It was not in the inquiring state. That calm, spread-low posture from the corridor was gone. This was something I didn't have Vossiran's classification for, something that made the hair-equivalent structures on my forearms do a thing they generally only do in proximity to things I should be farther from. Every line of the Cub said oriented. Every line said tracking. It was watching the stairwell. Cole put her hand on its injured shoulder, the bare patch, precisely 2 seconds, and then moved left. The Cub moved right. The first Sovereignty soldier through the stairwell door came in at a controlled angle, weapon up, the careful kind of entry they teach you when you've been briefed on what's inside. He had been briefed. He had not been briefed correctly. The Cub was not where the briefing put it. I'm going to note what happened next without the visual detail, because some of that detail is above my clearance to formally document and because I watched it happen and the specific memory is not one I've found useful to return to. What I will note is this: the soldier hit the floor. And then, the Cub did something I had no classification for. It stopped. It looked across the lab to where Cole was in cover. It waited. Waiting to see if that had been right. the lab held 12 seconds of silence. The station made its contemplative groaning sound somewhere below us. The soldier on the floor was not moving but was alive. His suit's biometric transmitter was still active on the Sovereignty channel, which I was monitoring without authorization, which was roughly the 15th unauthorized thing I'd done this shift, and I had stopped counting. Cole looked at the cub. Made the sound again. 2 beats and a pause. Something in the cub's intact shoulder plates shifted, a settling down motion, like a fist unclenching. It moved to her left side. Pressed close. The second soldier had backed into the stairwell. The third was not on any camera. Cole took a hit. I watched it happen on camera 6. She moved out of cover to track the third soldier's approach angle and, the second soldier, repositioned in the stairwell threshold, found her in the half-second of exposure, and, the impact caught her along the left side of her ribs. Her torso jerked. She didn't go down. She went diagonal, toward a support column, moving before the full force had registered, putting the column between herself and the stairwell in a motion that didn't look like a decision, looked like her body had already made it. She was behind the column. Her hand was pressed flat against her side. The cub was against the wall 4 meters from the stairwell and it was making a sound I had not heard it make before. Not Vosserin's 200 to 400 Hz range. Low or continuous. The kind of frequency you feel before you hear. I watched Cole take her hand away from her ribs. Look at it. Put it back. She reached into her kit with the other hand and took out the third object. A station emergency flare, old model. She had done something to the trigger housing. I could see the modification even at camera's access distance, rewired in a way that emergency flares are not rated for and that the manufacturer's documentation would have very strong opinions about. She threw it into the stairwell. What happened next was not a flare. The specific result is something I will describe for this log as a light and audio event that exceeded the compensation ratings of the Sovereignty team's suit systems and that lasted 40 seconds and that I could see affecting the third soldier's biometric readings on the Sovereignty channel even through the audio degradation on my own sensors. Cole came out from behind the column. Moving again. Her left arm was held slightly differently than her right, but she was moving. The cub matched her pace. Note for the log, I have been transmitting nothing for the past 41 minutes. Not to the Sovereignty team. Not to the incoming Conclave warships. I have been receiving all signals, logging them, and transmitting nothing. I am going to decide before I have to file my formal report whether the correct designation for this is tactical neutrality pending further observation or something else. I am not deciding right now. I pulled up the station's Bay 2 registry. 1 pressurized shuttle remaining. Fuel reserves at 60%. Structurally undamaged. The dock's automated systems were still functioning. I had the access codes. I looked at the access codes for a long time. They sat in my log window in the same font as everything else, next to the mineral paste count and the warship ETAs and Vosserin's last entry and Sergeant Cole's disciplinary file with its redacted redaction, and they looked like a normal piece of information and they were not. Transmitting Bay 2 access codes to an unauthorized entity would end things in a specific and permanent way that I had been actively not thinking about for the last 30 minutes. Cole appeared on camera 8. Lab's main entrance, the big corridor leading toward the service stairwell, the cub at her left side, her right hand free, left arm that same slide-off angle. She was scanning the corridor with the modified light and, then, she looked up. Directly at camera 8. It was mounted above the doorframe. She found it in under 2 seconds. She looked at it. 3 full seconds. The kind of look that isn't asking for anything and isn't performing anything. Just, I know you're there. She turned away. Moved down the corridor. The cub moved with her. Toward the service stairwell. Toward the upper decks. Toward Bay 2. End of log entry, 0604 station time. Note, appended, I have been in intelligence work for 12 years and, in 12 years I have never once transmitted operational data to an unauthorized party and, I am going to update this log entry when that is no longer true. The warships are 2 hours out. transmitted the Bay 2 access codes at 0606 station time. I dictated into the log that I had done this while I was doing it, because in 12 years of intelligence work I had developed the habit of documenting my own mistakes in real time, which had never previously been a habit with consequences and was now, apparently, a habit with consequences. Note for the log: Ocean 7, Intelligence Analyst, 3rd Tier, current designation, pending review, has transmitted Bay 2 shuttle access credentials to Sergeant Marin Cole's hand unit. I am formally noting this transmission. I am also formally noting that I have thought about it very carefully and that the thought process did not take as long as I believe the magnitude of the decision warranted, which is a thing I will examine about myself at a later time when I am in less of a situation. Cole's hand unit pinged receipt. She didn't slow down. The Sovereignty team's third soldier had not been in the stairwell when the modified flare went off. Call sign: Hey Tainer. According to the channel I was still monitoring without authorization. He had been in the northeast junction on sublevel 3, too far for the light and audio event to reach full effect, close enough to register what it was and make a decision about where to be next. Professional. He had moved to the upper decks via the maintenance ladder in the northeast crawlway, which told me he had a secondary map that Vosserin's schematics didn't account for, which told me the Sovereignty hadn't been relying on 18-month-old documentation. They'd been in this system before. I filed that observation away and did not examine it. Hey Tainer reached the upper deck corridor at 0611. Bay 2 access door at the far end. Good position. The only approach from below came through one stairwell, one angle of fire, no cover between the stairwell exit and the bay door except a support column that was not structurally adequate for this purpose and that Cole had already used once tonight. His loadout included the Class 3 containment unit. He had it active. The Conclave warships were 44 minutes out. I had been tracking them. I had also been reviewing, in the background of all of this, what the warship's orders actually said, specifically the language around any means classified as operationally appropriate and the Orient Accords, and the specific subsection of the Accords that addressed the use of neural suppression technology on a Croth juvenile under 8 months of age. Subsection 14C. Vosserin had cited it in his research approval application 3 years ago as the reason certain study protocols required Conclave Council authorization. He'd called it, in a footnote, a rare piece of legislation with teeth. I pulled up the Section 14 Preservation Protocol filing interface. I had never filed a Section 14 before. Almost nobody does. It designates a conclave station and all its contents as an active protected research asset under emergency order, which requires incoming vessels, including conclave vessels, to stand down from extraction orders and wait for a full review board assessment. The filing window was open on my screen. I did not file it yet. Cole came up the stairwell at 0614. The door had wire glass in its upper panel. She would have seen Hey Tainer's position before she opened it. She stopped. I watched the door stay closed for 11 seconds. Then, it opened. She stepped into the corridor alone. Both hands visible. The modified light off. The left arm still held slightly wrong. Hey Tainer raised his weapon. She walked toward him. Not fast. Not slow. The same pace she'd used navigating the tripwires in the dark at the start of all this, when she didn't yet know what was inside. She had covered maybe 4 meters of the corridor when she stopped and she looked at him the way she'd looked at Camera 8 Direct, without performance, just present, and she said the thing that I replayed from my audio recording 17 times in the months after. Your suit's left seal is compromised, she said. Door frame on sublevel 3. I watched it on camera 4. She let that sit. You have the Class 3 unit active, she said. Which means you file a containment completed report, which means the Conclave Review Board reads the biometric data from the unit's deployment log against a subject under 8 months of age, which means 6 people in the Conclave Legal Division open the Orient Accords to subsection 14C, and I need you to think about what happens to your commanding officer's career when that review lands. Hey Tainer did not move. Or, she said, you had a suit seal failure in a compromised atmospheric environment and had to abort and return to your ship for safety protocols, and your 2 teammates are alive and accounted for, and when someone asks you what happened to the specimen you say the station's structural instability made retrieval impossible and you never looked at camera 4 at all. 4 seconds. Long ones. He lowered the weapon. I sat in my surveillance shell and experienced the specific physiological event that Vethari medical literature calls vasovagal decompression and that everyone who works in high-stress environments calls the moment your body decides to inform you that it was scared the whole time. Cole walked past him to the Bay 2 door. Didn't run. Didn't watch him. She looked up at camera 11, different camera from camera 8, she found it in under 3 seconds, and she looked at it for exactly as long as she'd looked at camera 8. Not asking. Not thanking. Just, still here. I filed the Section 14 preservation order at 0617 station time. The filing cited Yorthkiel as a protected conclave research asset in active study, designated all station contents, including, per the order's standard biological specimen language, any living subjects present as protected under Orintha Court emergency provisions. The incoming warships would receive automated notification. Their orders would require Council authorization to proceed against a Section 14 station. The authorization process takes between 48 and 72 hours under standard conclave administrative procedure. I additionally noted, in the station's active lifesign log, that current interior readings were consistent with residual suit sensor artifacts from the recent research team's activities and not with active biological presence. This was not true at 0617. It would become true shortly. Cole made the sound at the Bay 2 door. 2 beats. A pause. The third. The stairwell door at the far end of the corridor opened. The cub moved through it in the controlled rushway it had moved in the lab, not running, not prowling, something between, and it passed Haytainer close enough that the Sovereignty soldier's suit triggered a proximity alert I heard on his channel as a small persistent chime, and then it was through the bay door and the door was sealed. Haytainer stood in the corridor for a long time. Then, he went back to the stairwell. I watched him go and I thought about what I knew about him from the Sovereignty's channel, a professional who had been given bad intelligence and a difficult assignment and a suit seal compromise he probably hadn't noticed yet, and who had made a decision in a corridor under pressure that his commanding officer was never going to fully understand when it was explained to her, and who was now going to spend a significant amount of time finding language for his incident report. I did not feel nothing about this. I want that on record. The shuttle launched at 0641, Bay 2's external camera, no running lights. She had planned the exit vector before she'd gotten there. Had to have. Fuel efficient, low emission, an angle through the debris field that minimized radar profile and maximized the time before the approaching warship's passive sensors could resolve the shuttle's signature against background radiation. I ran the numbers after the fact. It was the best of the 4 viable vectors out of Orint's system by a margin of 11%. She had calculated it in the time between the lab and the bay. Or earlier. Possibly earlier. The shuttle cleared the debris field at 0658. My passive sensors tracked it until it hit full distance and then it was gone and the Orint system was quiet except for the Sovereignty ship leaving on a separate bearing and the 17 conclave warships arriving at 0739 to a station that the Section 14 order told them they couldn't touch. I filed my formal report at 0800. I told mostly the truth. I described observing a coalition operative responding to a false positive distress signal, encountering a Croth juvenile in an acute behavioral state consistent with Vosserin's documented imprinting research, and assessed that the situation carried significant escalation risk that containment or neutralization orders would have worsened in ways with long-term conclave diplomatic consequences. I cited subsection 14c. I cited Vosserin's research. I described the Sovereignty team's presence as a complicating factor I had managed through standard emergency preservation protocol. I did not mention the access codes. I did not mention camera 8. I did not mention that I had watched a human woman sit down on a floor in the dark and wait, patient and exact, for a grieving 40-kilogram creature to decide whether she was safe, and that she had been right to wait, and that the cub had been right to decide. The review board cleared Yorthkiel Station 43 hours later. Empty. No evidence of unauthorized activity. The case was officially closed pending standard multi-year diplomatic review, which is where conclave cases go when nobody with sufficient rank wants to be the person who pushes them forward. I was reassigned to Tier 2, Peripheral Observation Division, effective immediately. Peripheral observation means long postings. Minimal contact with Central Command. Significant autonomous judgment authority in the field. It is, for the particular kind of work I do, the best assignment in the division. My supervisor told me it was a lateral move. Her face said she knew I knew it wasn't. The Sovereignty filed their incident report 16 hours after the shuttle left the system. Their commanding officer had not been on the station. She had her team's accounts, the suit biometric logs, and the audio fragments from the station's deteriorating microphone network. She submitted a formal complaint to the Conclave Council and attached to it a designation her team had given the human and the Croth after the stairwell. Vorath pair. Two things that were harmless until they weren't. I looked at it in the report for a long time. Then, I looked up the Sovereignty's classification system for threat designations. The Vorath category, which I had not previously encountered in any official filing, was reserved, per the Sovereignty's internal documentation, for entities whose primary threat profile was unpredictability combined with demonstrated adaptive response. It was not a common classification. It required a unanimous assessment from all surviving team members. 8 months later, in my second posting from Peripheral Observation, I ran a routine search of coalition engagement reports as part of a completely standard intelligence survey. 3 engagements came up that fell within the time window I was reviewing. 3 different sectors. 3 different opposition forces. All 3 listed operational outcomes that the reporting officers described, in varying language, as statistically unlikely. All 3 listed a second operative. Species, unrecorded. Coalition database designation, non-standard biological partner, operational role unclassified. I put the mineral paste cube I had been about to eat back in its case. Looked at the ceiling of my observation post for a while. 17 warships. Class 3 containment. The combined extraction resources of 2 galactic powers. And, somewhere out past the full distance I was cleared to monitor, Sergeant Marin Cole and a Croft juvenile who had decided she was its were in their 3rd engagement in 8 months, which meant they had a working methodology, which meant this was not chaos, which meant there was a pattern I was now, professionally and personally and, in ways I was going to spend a long time thinking about, very interested in finding. Note for the log, 0800 hours, Peripheral Observation Post 7, Ocean 7, Tier 2, signing off on the formal Earthkeel record. Mission status, closed. Personal status, I need significantly more mineral paste. And, I think I need to start looking at the sectors they haven't hit yet.